And now we'll have a panel with, let's say, of different thinkers and builders of the API space. I'll invite them all on stage. Can we put them on stage, please? About Tara, the API rating agencies. Hello, David, Lorinda, Brian. How are you doing today?
Good.
Very well.
How are you, Mehdi?
I'm feeling well. I'm really excited by this panel. Actually, I didn't want to call you the usual suspect of the APIs, but let's say if you were let's say on a, not on stage, I would have said that, but nobody is hearing us publicly, so it's fine. No, the thing is, we have this vision over the last 10 years, I think, right, about like how we can enhance trust in that whole space. So maybe we can do a quick roundup here to introduce each other, and also what has been this common thinking about like how we can enhance trust in an API rating agency. Maybe David, you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Mehdi, and please don't disappear, because I think you ought to be part of this conversation as well. So let's pull the MC into the panel as well. So I'm David O'Neill. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called APIMetrics, and what we've been doing for the last 6 years now is looking at how you can rate and grade the performance of APIs, so you can actually mutually agree on what you are getting delivered by the API. And that opened up some interesting questions for me around what is good and what is not. And I've spoken a few times at different API Days events on how we're trying to work out what's good versus what's quality versus what's acceptable can drive you insane in the API space. And I started to realize that it's more than just performance. It's more than just the technical measures of how fast or reliable something is. There's a lot of other factors that I thought we were missing out of the nuts and bolts of whether an API is any good. And this, I think, does follow on from Carol's talk she just gave on the nature of quality, what goes into that. And last year, we decided that we ought to tackle that as a group of, as Mehdi put it, usual suspects in the industry. And what we're going to talk to you today about is that. But I'll let Lorinda go next with her introduction.
Thank you. So I'm Lorinda Brandon. I've been in the software industry for ages, longer than most people have been alive, I think. But and I've been in this API conversation for a good 15 years or so. And I think, I know Mehdi and I have met at many API conferences, including API Days multiple times. And I'm very frequently, you'll find me talking about things like API monitoring and keeping an eye on third-party APIs that you're relying on. And I think as this industry matures and as our individual API programs inside our companies mature, it's more and more important for us to have a standard way of measuring those things. So, we started off with the concept of, hey, just don't forget to measure these things. Now we're saying, well, maybe we should figure out how we can speak in a more common tongue about this. And so what I love about Tara, the API ratings agency, is that our mission is really to figure out how do we have a standard measure for the performance, for the reliability, for just the general quality of an API, so that we can mature this industry a little bit better. I think Carol had a great segue into this conversation with her discussion about API maturity and trust. So thank you for setting that up for us, Mehdi. But that's what this is all about, is how do we trust you? We rely on each other. We rely business to business, and internally in our own platforms, we rely on each other. We're not building big monolithic things by ourselves anymore. And so that's kind of the mission that we're on, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, and Brian, for the few who don't know you yet, can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Happy to. Hey, everybody. I'm Brian Costello, and for the last decade or so, I have been passionately engaged in consumer permission data sharing ecosystems, most notably open banking and open finance around the globe. A big part of that passion is focusing on positive outcomes for the users of these ecosystems, the consumers, the investors, the small businesses. They rely on, and we want them to rely on these connected data ecosystems to improve their lives. And if they're going to rely on it, then it has to be reliable. And so a big part of building out these ecosystems is making sure that they are fit for purpose, making sure that the developer experience, that the operational experiences can be measured, can be and can be addressed. Can be fixed if necessary. When as Carol said, when we talked about enterprise type agreements and integrations with APIs, SLAs were part and parcel of that. They were built in, they were measured, there were penalties for it. And as we shifted to these open data ecosystems where developers are consuming APIs and then consumers are consuming the developer's work product, the SLAs have kind of gone away. And so we've got to put measurement in place, and we have to do it in an enforceable manner. And that's what the API rating agency is seeking to do, not to put in place prescriptive values, but start the conversation about what needs to be measured, how do we measure it, and how do we make sure that all the stakeholders are involved in that conversation.
Yeah, and Brian, and I remember 10 years ago when Twitter, let's say, broke their API and all the clients' application there, like there was a huge movement, at least in the place. And I remember I personally started a blog called API 500, like the Standard and Poor's of APIs, say, we should do something, we should rate APIs, whatever. But again, when you're alone and the industry is not mature there, but I've seen APIMetrics and I've seen all the discussion we had at API conferences. And yes, and really, I think it's only a group that can handle this, and yes. And I also remember I spent like 1 year working in trade credit insurance. It's like companies who ensure the fact that the contract will be executed, right? So they put not a gun, but they put money on the table and they say, each one, if you don't execute the contract, money will come to the one who is the one in default actually will have to pay. But we really put pressure, and also there is a grade. So because there is money, there is a grade the money is higher when the grade is higher and everything. So there is the logistic and the supply chain industry has learned a lot over the last 100 years about how to ensure contracts are respected. In the digital infrastructure space, it's not the case. And I know, Lorinda, you have a clear statement about like how providers should be accountable and how let's say we should democratize the API industry at some point. Can you, it would be a great start if you can elaborate on this.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm sure I'm not the only one in this boat, but in our business, we are not only producers of APIs that other people will consume, but we are consumers of APIs. We are a SaaS management platform. That means we're consuming the APIs for these big SaaS providers. And man, it is hard to hold them accountable for anything beyond a very basic SLO. And that's not enough anymore. Like just having here's the performance we expect, the response time we expect, that's not enough. And so it becomes very hard to hold the larger API providers accountable for what they're delivering. And so when I talk about the democratization of APIs, it's like my dream is that eventually someday people are going to say, here's our contractual obligation is that you will keep your TARA rating at X. And if it falls below, you're breaching your contract with us. Like that's the ideal. And so if we can create this like holistic score, to your point, Mehdi, about scoring, right? If you have a score that you can hold people accountable to, it means they're delivering the right support, they're delivering the right version control, they're delivering the right performance, they're delivering like all the things that we will come up with as this is what makes a golden API. I think that's key. And then we can be held to the same, like it doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a giant API provider or it's a tiny API provider, we have a commonality, we have a score we can all like look to and say, this is what we're trying to achieve. And then, like I said, my ultimate dream is that we're starting to write that into contracts and say, you won't fall below this score or we get our money back. So that's what I hope for anyway.
Yeah, Brian, you
on
want
that, Mehdi, Lorinda, spot on. Obviously, enforcement's the stick. I would love to see Tara and the Tara score, if that's the way we go, become more of a carrot, right? Become a tool that API providers can use internally that they track against, and they see usage go up, and they've got internal processes to say we need to increase bandwidth, we need to increase IOPS, we need to do whatever we need to do, because part of being successful in the digital space is that your cost of doing business goes up. Maybe I'm being a bit Pollyannish on that. And then we can start building that trust mark or awareness of it, so that it's not just contractual enforcement, but it's like it becomes like a net promoter score, a digital net promoter score. But to do this, we need to have commonality in measurement, both in what we're measuring and then how we objectively drive those measurements.
Yeah, and let's remember a little bit like some cases why it's important. We've seen Twitter breaking a lot of APIs. We've seen Facebook a lot, not even noticing for breaking changes. We've seen LinkedIn killing startups by changing term of services. We've seen Google. I don't know if you know the Google graveyard. Like so many APIs have stopped without even notice and everything. And so many also smaller cloud providers, SaaS, PaaS, IaaS providers were slow and didn't respect their SLAs, but nobody was there to prove it. So at the end, nobody was compensated where they should have been. So there's many things, right? All the promises that have been shared by CEOs, the head of platforms, never delivered. So yeah, we need more trust, and this is why we're here today. And I will just finish by saying, like, there is hope. There is hope. If you've seen the Google Enterprise API label. So it seems that, some big players understand that we need to label APIs, but it should not be one provider for its own. You cannot be the judge of yourself, right? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, we need more independent stuff. You've been doing that for some time, David.
We have. I think following on from your point, the phrase we use a lot when we're meeting with customers and partners is you shouldn't mark your own homework. It would make life much easier at school if you did, but what we see, you mentioned Google. Google are quite bad at this, to be honest. And I say this as a huge Google fan, and we're a Google hosted solution. But proving to Google that they have not met their SLO obligations that they're quite public about having is quite hard. They're not necessarily, you have to prove to them that they have missed their SLO. They won't ever tell you. And it's quite an involved process. Other big cloud vendors are starting to see that. Over the last, I would say, 2 years, which is great for APIMetrics, but we've seen real attention being paid not by necessarily the engineering groups, but the business groups, to go back to Carol's points of, hang on, we are offering these services, we are charging for these services, we need to understand what it is we are selling, and they're coming at it from a different perspective, which is if we can offer a better level of service that we can prove we offer, we can charge more. And I think that goes to the maturity model of the API economy. And I think what I started with the concept of the API ratings agency and the advisory council was what are we missing? And as Brian said, measurement is one of those things. It still shocks me that there are no common agreed measurement standards. Everybody brings their own favorite measure to the table, and it's usually the gateway log from your side of the equation if you're a provider. You never, ever want to start getting into conversations about the customer's side of the equation from where they're calling from. And just having some best practice on that would be very helpful for the industry. But as we've opened this up, and this is something we're interested in the industry coming back to us with, is we hear about documentation. What constitutes good documentation? Just throwing an open API spec out there is not enough. It needs to have examples. It needs to be usable. Do you stand, to your point, Mehdi, behind your API? Are you just going to turn it off on a random whim on a wet Tuesday afternoon without telling anybody, or version it beyond use? What about the data that comes back? How do you stand behind the data coming back, meeting a particular schema? I think as we move forward, looking at the security question and the quality question, actually being able to prove that the data you send back is what you say you're going to send back, in the format you're going to send back, attached to the schema you send back, is an integral part of the quality equation. And not a lot of people are thinking about that yet because it's quite hard to do. But these are things where we need to have best practice and standards for. And what I'm excited by is people are starting to really understand that this isn't, the industry has matured in the last decade away from, oh, we've got to have an API, to we have to have something people rely on. And we actually have to understand, to Lorinda's other point, of where we are exposed to other technologies. You know, if AWS Lambdas go down, does that affect APIs that we are using further up in a different app we hadn't even thought of? I think there's a whole network of things that are currently not really thought about in the way people currently measure and verify that things are working. And that's what we're trying to pull together some best practice on and some ways of doing it. And yes, ultimately, my vision is we have a framework for scoring quality. And in the same way that you would check your credit score with a number of agencies before you go and get a loan, people actually go out and verify what the scores are for the services they integrate, rather than, hey, I know what Stripe is. I like Stripe. It's easy to use. I'm going to put it in our application for our payments, without doing any due diligence beyond that, and then leave it to somebody else to try and write a contract around it. I think that's the way we have got to where we are. But looking 5 years from now, I don't think that will be how the industry has evolved, where the industry will be.
So if we go back to what should be measured, right? So you said on the, let's say, more the performance side, like what should be in for performance? You say like what is time to first, the response time, time to first byte, time to last byte. What should be in?
I think all of those could be measured, but I think the key thing is, and we hear this over and over again from API providers, it should be from the point at which you should have a way to agree measurement from the point at which the consumer is calling the API, and look and be rated on their experience. And sometimes there will be problems with the user's architecture will be causing problems. Sometimes the infrastructure supplying the API will have problems. But having that end-to-end view, I think, is one of the key parts of measuring performance. And then you should get into, do we get back what we expect? Are we getting the response codes we want? There's a lot of shortcuts the industry have taken over the years, and building technology on HTTP codes, if we want to get into the technical weeds, was possibly a bad idea. It's very hard to work out, for example, if a HTTP 400 code is actually something went wrong or your platform's working as expected. And we see over and over again, people just go, well, that's a 400 code. It's not my problem. It's somebody else's. I'll ignore it. And it means their platform's failed, but it's failed in a very creative way. And we also see a reliance on 200 always being a pass. I don't ever wish to make fun of RunScope on this as word, but 200s aren't reliable either. We often see 200s with failure messages embedded or nothing returned at all. These are things that you need to keep on top of and actually have some way of agreeing how you measure them. And we don't actually have any best practice for that at the moment across the industry. I think Lorinda's got some views on that too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think you're touching on something that I think is really important and hard to do. I think we're way beyond the, how fast are you responding? Like the reliability of getting a response. We need to get much more granular around the quality of the response. What is this thing you responded to me with? Is it something I can use? Is it accurate? Is it what everybody is expecting? And so I think that's what David's touching on, and I think it's going to be that's a hard problem to solve from a tooling, metrics tooling perspective. But that I think is key now at this stage of our API maturity as far as an industry goes.
So monitor. No, Brian, you want to say something? Sorry.
I was just saying, and just to add to the complexity, on top of that, we need to look at the customer experience, and the developers expecting integrity in the data, integrity in the behavior of the APIs. Multiple APIs are being used in the product to provide the customer experience. So the interrelationship, interoperability between them. What happens? You get a cascade failure, or you get an error code that isn't handled correctly, creates incredible problem with the reliability. So being able to have a conversation around that to then start building out the framework is essential as well.
And I think to follow on from that with Brian, if we go back to one of Carol's points on security, security of APIs, it's not as simple as a website signing in. there can be multiple different APIs involved in using an API in a secure environment that aren't all part of even the same API specification. So if you're calling a financial services API, there can be an API involved in authenticating who the user identity is, then creating a token for the use of the API, and then making the API call itself. So you can have 3 different pieces that have to work in a timely fashion, in concert together, in order to achieve things. If you look at the way we tend to look at specifications now, that's not really covered, because the Open API specification is about individual single APIs specified. And what we're starting to look at from a business need is API orchestrations across groups of APIs, as Brian said, is becoming important. And that brings us into the other points you touched on, Mehdi.
Yeah, and time is going fast, but we said, okay, the performance is important, the developer experience is important, docs, code samples, exploration console, time to first hello world under, I don't know, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, something, right? So like the fact that, yeah, it's easy to explore. We talked about security, like do you respect standards? Are you inventing a new weird security protocol for the stuff? We had a question in the chat about like, does respecting RFC standard is an example of trust there, but what else could be in? Let me jump into that one. For example, for me, term of services are extremely important. The fact you respect the term of services you wrote, right? And the fact also your term of services, you take engagements like 3 months minimum for noticing for breaking change. You don't revoke for any reason at any time. You always give a reason, or at least you give a warning notice and a period for people to be able to change the behavior that may be not right? But the thing is, yeah, term of services are extremely important. And I would add the business model, right? The company policy at some point, because we've seen in the past some company really shifting and breaking everything. Like the fact that, the company, I think this is a personal opinion here, but company will engage to say, if we break the API for no reason at some point, there is a compensation at some point, right? Something like that. What else we could put into this global rating?
I think other comments we've had, and we really are looking for feedback and people wanting to get involved in this process. So feel free to email any of us or myself. But other things we've heard is just versioning. How long do people stand behind the version of the API they've released before it stops working?
Yeah.
The data quality or the data freshness that comes back. How often are the services revised? So if you're what is their back end doing in order to serve you fresh data? Or are they just caching everything and they're not paying any attention to that? There's a lot of these other soft metrics, time to first hello world, ease of reading of the documentation. There's a lot of things in here which are not really stored anywhere, but they are things that we know we ought to pay attention to. And I think we should end up with is some mechanism for grading and measuring the performance quality, but also giving people a score for those soft metrics. Yes, you've got a fast and reliable API, but it's borderline unusable for anybody who comes in fresh. Can you just sign up for a developer account? That's sort of part of the process. I've just seen the GGVA Capital have released a list of the API first 50 top API first companies. 15 of the companies on the list, you cannot sign up for a developer account to test the API. In my mind, that's not an API first company. That's a software company who has APIs, but they should have the badge of API first taken away from them. So
this is sorry, David, that's where I was in my head when Mehdi said, what else would you include? That was one that I was going to say. There's a developer experience that has to do with, do you have a sandbox? Like, how easy is it for me to do some integration work and test it before I have to launch? And then I think the other thing I was going to go to too, Mehdi, is I know you're working on a terms of service project that would help to standardize what the terms of service are, but I think that's key too. It's not just do you stand behind your terms of service, but how decent is your terms of service? How complete is it? What does it have in it? And so I think it's, again, Brian used the word complexity a little while ago. This is no small task we're trying to accomplish, but I think it's time.
Yeah. And it's not just, and there's a whole governance aspect to it. If we look at it, if we look at this issue through a maturity model lens, there's a whole governance of the API. It's not just don't turn it off without warning, but how can developers provide feedback? Is there a community to grow and evolve and the API over time? These things are part of what an API first company would do, and many of them, to David's point, don't.
Yeah, and just to say, I've been doing some work with high manufacturers and supply chain companies, Toyota and others. They would never work and accept to work with someone who is late, who has a weird contract, who does not respect the quality of what they provide and everything. Like, it would be impossible. It would be just impossible to work with this. Why we accept this in digital infrastructure and the API economy?
Exactly.
I don't know.
It is a supply chain issue, and we should take the work that's been done in physical supply chains and apply them to the digital supply chain for this and for third-party risk management.
Well, and just to echo that, it's the same as financial services. You wouldn't buy something from a supplier you hadn't done some basic due diligence on. You just wouldn't. But people integrate to APIs without doing any checks on what it is they've integrated to, and that's not sustainable as businesses become more and more exposed to other providers and to chains of technology.
So just to wrap up, like, how do we see the council working, and how people can be engaged right now? At least we know it's a draft, it's a working group, but how people can be engaged?
So I think the first thing is we are looking for feedback from the industry. We're looking to listen to what people want. Our vision is to release a charter slightly later in the year and start to create working groups to create position papers on the things, the methodologies we think are essential for the industry. But beyond that, we want to be steered by the community. And I see this as a crowdsourced, community-driven endeavor where we agree on what the best practices are. So if you're the head of API program at a large finance institution, you're getting a lot of pushback from your risk compliance group over how you should do some of these things. There'll be something you can take to them and say, hang on, this is what the industry best practice is. I wish to meet the industry best practice. And we're looking for people who want to volunteer for the working groups, but also people who are interested in what we've not thought of that potentially has huge impact on the industry. I'm open to Lorinda or Brian having any additional points on that one.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything David said. We're looking for people to get involved, and we're definitely looking for feedback. We'll be publishing more things more publicly that we can then gather feedback on. And we probably, now that we're all talking about this, David, Brian, we should probably get an email address that people can send to that isn't us.
Yes, that is on my to-do list, and I will be sorting that out shortly.
And really to underscore, we want developers, consumers of APIs, as well as the API providers. And API providers, please come not just to get some ammunition to go back to your risk and compliance people, but to help improve your business, to help you legitimately earn the badge of API first company, and to inject some reasonableess into the conversation, to counterbalance what some of the API consumers are coming to the table with, right? I mean, this is it's an ecosystem, and it's going to be a living, breathing ecosystem that's going to evolve over time. But we need to get the MVP in place first.
Yeah, and again, the engagement I can take on the Apidays part is that if the API rating agency is where its member has gathered, we will do everything we can to gather them on board working groups in the US, in Europe, in APAC, in the conference we run, at least to get the discussion going, gathering API providers, consumers, and sometimes policymakers at some point, they want to be involved. So we've seen that. So yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you, Lorinda. Thank you, Brian, for putting the stage for a long journey about rating APIs to enhance trustworthiness of digital infrastructure. Yes, it's time to make API trustworthy.
It is. Thank you so much, Mehdi. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, and
thanks
see
all.
you
Be well.
at next.